Hi everyone, my name is Angela. This is Paperbacks Galore, and today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in September. I read 12 books in September and my average rating was a 3.73 stars, which is actually kind of low for me. And the only 5-star that I had was a reread, so let's get into the books. I'm going to start with the books I have physically, and these are going to be in no particular order. I read Signal to Noise by Silvia Moreno Garcia and gave it 4 stars. This is a witchy coming-of-age novel set in Mexico City in the 80s. And we also flash forward to the present where the main characters are in their mid-30s in 2009. And in this story, Meche and her 2 friends, Sebastian and Daniela, discover that they can actually cast spells using music. And all 3 of them are kind of outcasts. They're not popular at school. None of them are conventionally attractive. And so they kind of use these spells to kind of get what they want, and it's a very, I think, unique story that also draws on like common tropes. Like I feel like watching outcasts in high school is like a very common thing to base a story around, but this was just so unique and I was very entertained. There's a little splash of romance in here that was so compelling to me. And yeah, I'm really glad I read this because I bought this completely on a whim a couple years ago and I was worried that I wouldn't like it, but it really delivered for me, so 4 stars. I'm very proud of myself for reading this next one. I have owned this since 2021 and I have been eyeing it for many years because it's just one of those books that's like in every bookstore and very popular. And even when I barely knew about any popular books, I knew about this one, and that is The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. I listened to most of this on audio. Occasionally I would open up the book and follow along with my eyes and speed up the audiobook, but I thought the audiobook narrator's performance was stellar. The voices that he did just like captured the characters' essences so incredibly well. He had to do like a Russian accent for a lot of the book as well, and it was good in my eyes. This is the story of Theo, who is a 13-year-old New Yorker, and he and his mom are in an art museum when there is a terrorist attack, and he survives and his mother doesn't. While he is in the museum, after the explosion, he makes a connection with an old man, which leads him to this antique shop later on. And also, the old man, in his kind of dying paranoia and confusion, convinces him to take this painting called The Goldfinch, which his mother really loved and they were looking at before the explosion. And so Theo is now an orphan and has this painting and he doesn't really know what to do with it, and he is incredibly confused and scared and doesn't want to get in trouble. And he is eventually taken in by this like wealthy family on like Park Avenue. It's like one of his friends from school and his family, and then we just watch him grow up and eventually have to deal with the consequences of having this famous painting. I will say my only complaint with this book is that Theo, as a 13-year-old, the way that he thinks, the way that his mind works, like he is a genius. Like he is literally a genius, but that's not really acknowledged or said because I just think Donna Tartt is a genius, and so almost every character, okay, not almost every, but some characters like come off as like extremely intelligent, and then in other scenarios it's like, oh, Theo's not like that good at school. Like, so just the way that she wrote him when he was 13, I was a little bit like, girl, come on, what 13-year-old boy thinks like that? But I gave this 4.5 stars. I really loved this. I would say the only reason this isn't getting a 5 is because of the last like 100 pages or so. I just really didn't like or appreciate the direction that it went in, but overall this was such a character driven story and there was so much about like art and literature in it that made me feel, I don't know, it was like reading something that was way smarter than me, and like I knew that it was a little bit above my head, but I was still having a really wonderful time. And I think because I was listening to the audiobook, I didn't feel the need to like sit down and research every like reference to an artist or a film or a book that I didn't understand. But I think Donna Tartt's writing is incredible. Her mind is, I don't know how someone could sit down and write this. It's one of those books where you feel like the author is a genius. So I would highly recommend listening to this. I thought it was very good and very interesting, and I can definitely see why it won the Pulitzer. I also read Warrior Girl Unearthed this month by Angeline Booley. This one is kind of hard to pitch because I feel like the summary in the inside flap makes it seem like it's going to be more of a murder mystery or a like searching for missing people mystery than it really is. Essentially, we have our main character Perry, who is an indigenous teenager living in Michigan, specifically on Sugar Island, and she has a summer internship with this like program for indigenous youth, and she's working at a museum, and she is learning about this law called NAGPRA, which is about returning native artifacts and human remains back to indigenous communities rather than keeping them with museums in the United States. And essentially, even though this law sounds like a very good thing, there are a lot of exceptions that can be made and things don't actually get returned to native communities. There are a lot of like loopholes that researchers and academics at these universities can use to kind of keep the stuff with them. And it's very sad, and it's very it makes Perry very angry. It makes you as a reader very angry. And there also are women going missing in this community, but it's not necessarily like, you know, Perry's going around collecting clues and trying to figure out what's going on. It's not like a mystery. So it's kind of just about Perry and her community and learning about this law and learning the ropes at the museum and her family life and her friends. I really enjoyed this. I gave it 3.75 stars. This is a YA book, if I hadn't mentioned that already. I think I was just a little bit screwed going into this because I was expecting it to be more of a mystery, but I did really appreciate this book, and I'm really glad that I read it, and I would recommend it for sure. A book that I would not recommend at all is Murder Your Employer by Rupert Holmes, who is apparently the guy who sings and wrote the Pina Colada song. Like, if you like pina coladas, that song, apparently he wrote that, which is random. This is a book where there's a school called McMaster's, and they are trying to teach people how to be effective, clever murderers, which sounds like an interesting premise, and it was. I did chuckle a few times at the very beginning, but essentially this book takes place in the 1950s, which you are not told, by the way. I really think there's nothing that indicates that explicitly until the end, so you kind of have to figure it out through context clues, which is really stupid. But because it takes place in the 1950s, I feel like the author was like, ooh, I can get away with some homophobia and some misogyny and some transphobia because it's the 1950s, and that's just what they did. And I feel like he like kind of leaned into that a little bit, and it was very strange. It felt like reading something that was written a long time ago rather than something that was published in 2023. And also, there's no mystery in this. There's no mystery. We are following one main student who's a man, and then two other women who are kind of like side characters, but also you get their perspective sometimes. And you're essentially a little bit at the school, and then you go off into the real world, and you're watching these three people try to successfully commit the murders that they have been like training to do. And I think in a different author's hands, this could have been amazing. This, like, the concept itself, I will give it to him, is cool, but the execution, pardon the pun, was horrible. It was so incredibly detailed, but I say that like in a negative way. Like the details were so unnecessary and boring, and the characters were incredibly flat. There was so much emphasis on like actresses like sleeping with like TV and movie executives to get their part. Like there was just so much about that I was just like, what fantasy is this guy playing out? And yeah, there's no mystery. You're just watching these people try to commit their murders. You're watching them like do the plan, and you kind of already know the plan, or you know parts of the plan. So yeah, this was really bad. I really disliked this. I'm giving it 2 stars, which I know 2 stars isn't like the worst rating. Like I could have given it 1 star. I honestly, if a book is 1 star, I'm probably not going to finish it. The next book I'm going to talk about is a book that I think would have been 1 star if I'd finished it. I will give it to him that the premise is interesting, and that, you know, at times the writing could be clever. There were little jokes that were funny, but overall I thought this was pretty bad, and it is a beautiful book, but I will be unhauling this at the end of the year. And then the book that I own physically that I DNF'd, even though I was really excited about it, is Angelica Frankenstein makes her match by Sally Thorne. I would like to explain to you the scene that made me DNF this. This was literally on page 11. I only made it to page 12. So let me set the scene. Angelica, our main character, and her brother, Victor Frankenstein, are at a morgue. And they are looking through dead bodies to use for their experiments. But specifically, they are looking for a man to mold into the perfect husband for Angelica. Okay, so this is what Angelica's brother says to her. Here, you'll like this one over here, rippling all over with muscles and a cock like a hog's hind leg. I think you've got a few options to work with here. The shroud was pulled down to the knees and she assessed the body part in question. The anatomy manuals had not prepared her. Is it too big? And then Victor says, Sister, I cannot advise you on such things. Just get spares where you can. I'm sorry? I do not want to read about a brother and sister combing through dead bodies and talking about their genitals and joking about them. I don't know what I thought this book would be. Like, obviously, there are kind of spin-offs or adaptations of Frankenstein that are silly and funny, but at its core, Frankenstein is not like a funny book. Like, it's a book that deals with very serious questions about lots of things that we don't need to get into, but I don't know what I thought this would be, but I wasn't expecting it to be them literally at the morgue, like, defiling dead bodies, trying to piece together hot dead body parts to make a man. So this was horrible. I DNF this. I will be getting rid of this. And I hate that I paid money for this. I bought it used, but I still paid at least like $8 for it, so yeah. And then the last physical book that I have to talk about is Anne of Avonlea by L.M. Montgomery. This is my only 5-star for the month, and it doesn't really count as like, you know, a real 5-star because I already knew it was 5 stars. That's why I'm rereading it. So I do wish that I had had like a new book that was 5 stars, but this book brought me so much joy. This is the sequel to Anne of Green Gables, and in this book we start out with Anne at 16 years old, and she is starting her career as a teacher. Yes, I know 16 is very young to be a teacher. I don't know how things worked in the early 1900s in Canada, but this is a really charming and lovely story, very cozy, very cottagecore, very character driven and funny, and I love all of the nature scenes and all of the romance. Not like romance like love, I mean that too, but also just like how Anne sees the world is so romantic with a capital R. So yeah, I really loved reading this, and I hopefully we'll read the 3rd book in the series this month as well. I also read This Ravenous Fate by Haley Dennings. This is a YA fantasy about sapphic black vampires in 1920s Harlem, and if that description sounds amazing, it does, but I ultimately was pretty disappointed with this book. I felt like the 1920s like setting was very underutilized. It didn't really feel like the 1920s in any way. I mean, they went to like a couple like dance jazz clubs, but I don't know, something about it just didn't really feel like the 1920s. I didn't really love the plot. I was quite bored at some parts and had a lot of questions and things that I had to critique, but I did really appreciate the dynamic between the two main characters because they are like former childhood friends turned enemies, and obviously they turn into lovers, and you really did see the enmity between them and how much they had against each other. So I did appreciate that, but overall, not quite my cup of tea, so I gave this one 2.5 stars. I also read The Dream Thieves, which is the sequel to The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. This is a YA fantasy series that takes place in Virginia, and there are psychics and magic and magical forests, and it's kind of light on the fantasy. There's not really like a defined magic system. You're kind of learning about how magic works along with these characters, and the relationship dynamics between the characters seems to really be why people love this series so much. I gave the sequel 3.5 stars. I enjoyed it, but I was pretty bored at some points, and there was a new character who was introduced who took up a lot of the focus that I really didn't like, called Kavinsky. So I'm not going to be continuing with the series. I just have so many books I want to read, but I am glad that I read the 1st and 2nd books, and wouldn't discourage anyone from reading them. They're just not quite what I want to be focusing on. I also read Graveyard Shift by M.L. Rio, which I gave 4 stars. This is a novella about a group of strangers turned friends at this university. There is a no smoking rule on campus, and the very edge of campus where you can smoke is this graveyard. And all of these people are kind of insomniacs or people who stay up really late for some reason or another. Only one of them is actually a student at this university, so it was kind of interesting to follow characters who live in a college town who aren't all just students. And essentially they discover something strange going on in this graveyard one night, and so the book takes place over one singular night and they are trying to figure out what's going on. She did not disappoint me. I really enjoyed this. I thought it was really unique and atmospheric and immersive, and I liked the character work, and I would have read a full-length novel of this, and I look forward to another full-length novel from her. I read 2 Ellie Hazelwood books this month. I don't know why, but I read Bride and I read Love on the Brain. I have a standalone review for Bride on my channel, so I'll just say it is a romance between a vampire and a werewolf, and their species really hate each other. There's been war going on for a long time, but they are trying to bring about peace. So the vampire and the werewolf get married, and we have a marriage of convenience and enemies to lovers, and I had a lot of fun with it. I gave it 4 stars. Love on the Brain is a STEMinist novel. So our main character is a neuroscientist. I think her name is B. And essentially she gets the opportunity to work on a project at NASA, but her co-lead on the project is Levi, who is kind of her nemesis from grad school. Nemesis isn't really the right word, but Levi has always been very cold and standoffish to her, and she truly believes that he hates her. And so this is a very awkward scenario for her, and obviously they fall in love. I gave it 3 stars. I had some issues with it, but at the end of the day, it was a fun, easy read, and I just listened to it and enjoyed it, so I didn't really have any strong feelings either way, so 3 stars felt right. I also listened to With You Forever by Chloe Leese, which is the 4th book in the Bergman Brothers series. So my history with this series is very mixed, because the very first book I read last year and I gave 5 stars, and then this year I read the next 2 books and I gave both of them 3 stars, which is so strange just because of how much I loved the first one, and then the second and third one not really working for me was just, I was so sad. But this one I really enjoyed, and I gave it 4.5 stars. This is the story between Axel and Rooney, and Axel is one of the Bergman brothers, and Rooney is the best friend of one of the love interests in one of the other books. And Axel is very private and withdrawn and shy, not necessarily shy, but quiet. And Rooney is more of this sunshine, it's grumpy sunshine, essentially. But Axel's, a really nice guy. He's just not showing affection very readily. And they kind of end up at Axel's family cabin at the same time. And they enter into a marriage of convenience for financial reasons. Basically, Axel was left an inheritance by his uncle with the provision that he has to be married to receive it. And the family cabin, that means a lot to his family, is kind of falling apart, and he doesn't want his family to know. He wants to just fix it for them, and it's kind of the way he shows his love, and he wants to take care of this by himself, but he just doesn't have the money to do all the repairs. So he and Rooney get married so that he can get the money, and they fall in love. It's a beautiful story. I really liked that it took place in the autumn, and there's also really special autism representation, and Chloe Leese herself is autistic, so its own voices. And there's also representation for ulcerative colitis, I think. Rooney has a chronic illness. So if you want to read an autumnal romance that takes place in a cabin with forced proximity and grumpy sunshine, this is one for you. And last but certainly not least, we have The Scholar and the Last Fairy Door by H.G. Perry. This is an ARC that I got approved for on NetGalley, so thank you so much to Red Hook. I really enjoyed this book. This is 70% Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies and 30% Babel. We're in England in the 1920s. There are fairies, there's magic spells, there is this university for magic that is a kind of joint effort between Oxford and Cambridge, and it kind of exists in a mysterious location, like nobody knows where it actually is, so you access it through a certain like portal in either Oxford or Cambridge. And our main character, Clover, is not a magical person by any means. She is just a regular girl living on a farm with her family in England. The people who have magic or who practice magic in this world are from these elite aristocratic families, but she is drawn into this world of magic because her brother is injured in World War I, and it's not a regular injury, it's a fairy curse. And she learns that if she finds a tutor and studies really, really hard, she could actually get into this magical school called Camford and study magic herself, even though she is not part of one of these magical families. And even though this would be really difficult for her and she would stand out like a sore thumb amidst all these wealthy people who have been doing magic their whole lives, she does it because she wants to find a cure for her brother's fairy curse. And while she's at school, she meets this group of friends, and it's really about their friendship dynamic, and they start meddling in magical things that are forbidden, and that's essentially all you need to know. There's so much to love about this book. If you really love reading about like a group of friends and their dynamic like at like a magical school, I think you will love this book. It was very well written. It was descriptive and atmospheric without being like flowery writing, and I'm really excited to like promote this book because I liked it a lot. I ordered myself a physical copy from my local indie even though I've already read it, and I'm excited to like, you know, post about it, and hopefully people will read this and love it. I gave it 4 stars. It didn't end up being like a 5-star for me just because I didn't quite have that feeling, but I really, really enjoyed this, and I think it's a very special book. Those are all of the books I read in September. I'm so excited for my October reading. It is currently October 2nd, and I've already finished a book that was 5 stars, so I'm excited to talk about that next month and read a bunch of very spooky autumnal reads this month. If you got to the end of the video, thank you so much. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more bookish content from me, and I hope you have a lovely week.